when a bullet meant for a powerful CEO found its mark in a struggling father's chest. Instead, it didn't just save a life, it rewrote destiny. One split-second decision in a parking garage would transform two broken families into something neither could have imagined. This is the story of Marcus Hayes, the single dad who took a bullet for love, and the woman whose tears at his doorstep the next morning would change everything. The morning sun cast long shadows across the cracked asphalt of Lincoln Elementary's parking lot as Marcus Hayes adjusted the rearview mirror for the third time, watching his 7-year-old daughter Emma bounce excitedly in her booster seat. Her auburn curls caught the light like spun copper, and for a moment the weight pressing down on his shoulders seemed to lift just enough for him to breathe. "Daddy, do you think Mrs. Peterson will like my drawing?" Emma held up a crayon masterpiece featuring two stick figures under a rainbow, one tall, one small, both smiling. "She's going to love it, sweetheart." Marcus's voice carried the warmth he reserved only for his daughter, though his eyes betrayed the exhaustion of another sleepless night spent calculating bills on the kitchen table. The eviction notice tucked into his jacket pocket felt like it was burning a hole through the fabric. "That's you and me, right, Daddy? That's us. Always us." The school bell echoed across the courtyard, and Marcus felt the familiar tug in his chest as Emma unbuckled herself and gathered her backpack, a hand-me-down from the church donation box that she treasured like it was made of gold. "Love you to the moon and back," she said, their daily ritual. "And around all the stars," Marcus replied, forcing brightness into his voice as he watched her skip toward the building, her unicorn backpack bouncing with each step. As Emma disappeared through the school doors, the weight of reality crashed back down on Marcus's shoulders like a physical force. 32 years old, and he felt ancient. The job at the hardware store barely covered rent, let alone the mounting medical bills from Emma's bout with pneumonia last winter. His ex-wife Jessica had vanished into the night 2 years ago, leaving only a note about finding herself and a little girl who still asked when mommy was coming home. Marcus pulled out of the school parking lot and headed toward downtown, where he'd been picking up odd construction jobs to supplement his income. His pickup truck, a 2008 Ford, with more rust than paint, wheezed in protest as he navigated the morning traffic. The radio crackled with news about the city's booming tech sector and rising property values, a stark reminder of the world Marcus couldn't access. The Dalton Industries building rose like a glass and steel monument to success, its 40-story frame reflecting the morning sun with almost aggressive prosperity. Marcus had driven past it countless times, never imagining his life would intersect with the empire built within those walls. Sarah Dalton stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of her corner office, watching the city wake up below. At 35, she commanded respect in boardrooms filled with men twice her age, her sharp intellect and unwavering determination having built her late father's modest consulting firm into a tech powerhouse worth hundreds of millions. But success had come at a cost that no balance sheet could quantify. "Mrs. Dalton." Her assistant's voice crackled through the intercom. "Your 9 a.m. is here." "Send him in, Janet." But it wasn't a client who walked through her office door. It was her 9-year-old son, Jake, still in his school uniform, his dark hair disheveled and his usually bright eyes clouded with worry. "Jake, what are you doing here? You should be at Riverside Prep." The boy shifted uncomfortably, his small hands clutching the straps of his designer backpack. "I told them I felt sick. I needed to see you." Sarah's heart clenched as she recognized the fear in her son's eyes, the same fear that had lived there since the divorce 6 months ago. David Morrison, her ex-husband, had a way of casting shadows, even when he wasn't present. "Come here, baby." Sarah opened her arms and Jake rushed into them, his 9-year-old frame still small enough to fit perfectly against her chest. "What's wrong?" "He called again last night. I heard you crying after you hung up." Sarah closed her eyes, cursing herself for not being more careful. David's calls had become increasingly frequent and increasingly hostile since the judge had granted her full custody. His business ventures, funded largely by her success during their marriage, had collapsed spectacularly, and his rage had found its focus in the two people he blamed for his downfall, Sarah and Jake. "Jake, I want you to listen to me. Sarah pulled back to look into her son's eyes, identical to her own shade of green. I will never let anything happen to you. Do you understand me? Never. But what if he... No. Sarah's voice carried the same steel that had built her empire. He's angry and he's saying things to scare us. But we're safe here. We're safe at home, and we're going to stay safe. Jake nodded, but Sarah could see the doubt lingering in his expression. She made a mental note to call her attorney that afternoon. The restraining order wasn't enough, not when David's desperation was growing by the day. 3 floors below in the parking garage, Marcus Hayes was having his own crisis of faith. The construction foreman had sent him home after an hour, claiming the job was overstaffed. Translation, they'd found someone willing to work for less than minimum wage under the table. Marcus sat in his truck, staring at his phone, knowing he had exactly $47 in his checking account and rent due in 3 days. The parking garage's fluorescent lights cast everything in harsh, unforgiving shadows. Marcus was about to turn the ignition when he heard voices echoing off the concrete walls, a man's voice, angry and demanding, and a woman's voice, sharp with fear. You can't keep hiding behind lawyers and court orders, Sarah. Marcus looked up to see a woman in an expensive business suit backing away from a man in a wrinkled dress shirt, his face red with rage. Between them, clinging to the woman's hand, was a young boy whose terror was visible even from 30 feet away. David, please, not in front of Jake. Jake needs to see what kind of person his mother really is. You destroyed everything, Sarah. Everything I built. Marcus's hand hesitated on his keys. Every instinct told him to drive away, to not get involved in what was clearly a domestic dispute. He thought of Emma waiting for pickup at 3:15, depending on him to be there. He thought of the eviction notice and the job interviews he needed to line up for tomorrow. But then he looked at the boy, and he saw Emma's face on that terrible night 6 months ago when she'd hidden under her bed while Jessica screamed about the prison of their life together. He saw the way the child was trying to make himself smaller and visible, while the adults in his world fell apart around him. I gave you everything. David was advancing now, and Sarah was running out of space to retreat. I supported your ridiculous business dreams when everyone else laughed at you. You supported me with my own money, David. You know that. Our money. It was our money until you decided you were too good for me. Marcus was out of his truck before he'd made a conscious decision to move. His work boots echoed against the concrete as he approached the trio, his heart hammering against his ribs. Excuse me. His voice cut through the garage's oppressive atmosphere. Is everything all right here? David spun around, his face contorting with fresh rage. This is none of your business, pal. Keep walking. But Marcus had already seen too much, the way Sarah's hand trembled as she held her son, the bruise just visible beneath her carefully applied makeup, the raw desperation in David's eyes that spoke of a man with nothing left to lose. I think the lady would like you to leave her alone. I think the lady can speak for herself. David took a step toward Marcus, his hands clenched into fists. This is between me and my family. We're not your family anymore, David. Sarah's voice was steady, but Marcus could hear the fear underneath. The divorce was final 3 months ago. You have no right to be here. I have every right. He's my son too. Jake whimpered and pressed closer to his mother, and something in that sound broke whatever restraint Marcus had been holding on to. He thought of Emma's nightmares, of the way she still checked the locks on the doors every night before bed. Look, man, I don't know what's going on between you two, but you're scaring the kid. Why don't you just walk away? Cool off. Come back and work this out when you're thinking clearly. David laughed, but there was no humor in it. Who the hell are you? Some kind of white knight. You have no idea what you're walking into. You're right. I don't know you, and I don't know your situation. Marcus kept his voice calm, his hands visible and non-threatening. But I know what it's like to be a father who's angry and hurting. And I know that taking it out on your family isn't going to fix whatever's broken. For a moment, something flickered in David's eyes, recognition maybe, or shame. But it was gone so quickly, Marcus wondered if he'd imagined it. You think you understand? David's voice dropped to a whisper that was somehow more terrifying than his shouting. You have no idea what she took from me, what she destroyed. David, please. Sarah's voice cracked. Just go. We can talk through the lawyers. The lawyers? David spat. Your lawyers. Bought and paid for with money I helped you earn. Marcus could see the situation spiraling beyond words, beyond reason. David's desperation was palpable, hanging in the air like smoke from a fire that was already out of control. In his peripheral vision, Marcus noticed the security cameras mounted in the corners of the garage, their red lights blinking steadily. Somewhere, security guards were probably watching this unfold on grainy monitors, but the garage's remote location meant help was still minutes away. Look, I get it, Marcus said, taking a small step forward, positioning himself slightly between David and his family. I've been where you are. My wife left me too, took me apart piece by piece until I didn't know who I was anymore. David's attention snapped fully to Marcus, his rage finding a new target. Your wife left you. Then you do understand. You understand what it's like to have everything stolen from you by someone you trusted. I understand being angry. I understand feeling like the world's against you. But I also understand that my daughter didn't deserve to pay for my mistakes, just like your son doesn't deserve to pay for yours. The parking garage fell silent, except for the distant hum of traffic and the soft sound of Jake's sniffling. Sarah watched the exchange with a mixture of gratitude and terror, her mind racing through escape routes and worst-case scenarios. You don't know what you're talking about, David said, but his voice had lost some of its edge. You don't know what she's capable of. I know she's trying to protect her son, just like you're trying to protect whatever's left of your relationship with him. Marcus took another small step forward, and David didn't back away. They were close enough now that Marcus could smell the alcohol on David's breath, could see the broken blood vessels in his eyes that spoke of too many nights spent drowning his anger in whiskey and regret. She turned him against me, David whispered, and for a moment he looked more like a lost child than a dangerous man. My own son flinches when I try to hug him. Maybe because you're scaring him, Marcus said gently. Maybe because he doesn't understand why mommy and daddy can't be in the same room without yelling. I never wanted this. David's voice broke. I never wanted to be the villain in his story. Then don't be. The words hung in the air between them, simple and profound. For a heartbeat, Marcus thought he might have gotten through. He thought David might walk away, might choose his son's well-being over his own wounded pride. But then, David's face hardened again, and Marcus saw the exact moment when reason abandoned him entirely. Easy for you to say. You probably have custody. You probably see your kid every day. You don't know what it's like to be erased from their life. I have my daughter because I chose her over my anger, Marcus replied. Every day I choose her over my anger. Well, I'm done choosing. David's hand moved to his jacket pocket, and Marcus felt his blood turn to ice water. I'm done being reasonable. I'm done being the good guy. The gun was small, almost toy-like in David's trembling hand, but the hole in its barrel looked big enough to swallow the world. Sarah gasped and pulled Jake behind her, her body becoming a shield between her son and the weapon that could steal his future in the space of a heartbeat. David, no! Sarah's voice echoed off the concrete walls. Think about Jake. Think about what you're doing. But David was beyond thinking, beyond reasoning. The rage that had been building for months, maybe years, had finally found its outlet. You want to take everything from me, fine, but you're not taking my son. Daddy, please. Jake's voice was small and broken, and the sound of it seemed to reach some buried part of David's humanity. Marcus watched David's face crumble as he looked at his son, really looked at him for the first time since he'd pulled the gun. Jake was pressed against the concrete pillar behind his mother, tears streaming down his face, his whole body shaking with terror. I'm sorry, David whispered, but his hand didn't lower. I'm so sorry, Jake, but she made me do this. She made me become this person. No, Marcus said, his voice cutting through David's spiral of self-justification. You chose this, just like you can choose to put the gun down. David's attention snapped back to Marcus, and the weapon swung toward him with casual menace. You should have minded your own business. Maybe, but I didn't. And now we're all here, and we all have to live with whatever happens next. Marcus could feel Sarah's eyes on him, could sense her calculating distances and angles, probably planning to run with Jake the moment an opportunity presented itself. but the parking garage offered no real cover, no protection from a bullet that could travel faster than any human could move. "You want to be the hero?" David's voice was steadying now, finding its purpose in destruction. "You want to save the day? I want your son to have a father he can remember without nightmares." The words hit David like a physical blow. His face contorted with pain and rage and something that might have been self-recognition. "It's too late for that." "It's never too late. Not as long as you're still breathing. Not as long as he's still breathing." Marcus took another step forward, and this time David raised the gun directly at his chest. They were close enough now that there was no possibility of missing, no chance of survival if David pulled the trigger. "Don't," Sarah breathed from behind him. "Please just let us go. Take whatever you want, but let us go." "I don't want your money," David said, without taking his eyes off Marcus. "I want my life back. I want my family back." "Then act like the man they fell in love with," Marcus said quietly. "Act like the father Jake used to run to when he scraped his knee. Act like the husband Sarah used to trust with her heart. That man is dead. That man is standing right here holding a gun on a stranger who just wanted to help. You think that's who you really are?" David's hand was shaking now, the weapon wavering between Marcus and some distant point beyond the garage. "You don't understand. I lost everything. My business, my house, my family. Everything I worked for, everything. I was gone." "You lost things," Marcus corrected. "But Jake is right there and he's still your son. Sarah is right there and she's still the mother of your child. You haven't lost everything unless you choose to." I can't go back. Too much has happened. Too many things I can't take back." "You can't go back, but you can go forward. You can be better tomorrow than you are today." The gun lowered slightly and Marcus felt a flicker of hope. But then David's face hardened again, and Marcus realized he was looking at a man who had already made his choice, who had already accepted the unacceptable. "He'll be better off without me," David whispered. "They both will." Marcus saw it in David's eyes a split second before it happened, not murder but suicide by proxy. David was going to force Marcus to become the villain, to take a life in front of Jake, to traumatize the boy in the name of saving him. "David, don't make your son watch this." But David was already raising the gun, his finger tightening on the trigger, and Marcus had a fraction of a second to choose between his own life and a little boy's innocence. He chose Jake. Marcus lunged forward as the gun went off, the sound echoing through the parking garage like thunder. The bullet caught him high in the chest, spinning him around and sending him crashing into the concrete pillar where Sarah and Jake had been cowering. But his momentum carried him into David, and they went down together in a tangle of limbs and desperation. The gun skittered across the concrete, spinning under a nearby car, and suddenly the fight was happening with fists and fury instead of bullets and finality. David was smaller than Marcus, but fought with the desperate strength of a man who had nothing left to lose. They rolled across the oil-stained concrete, each trying to gain the advantage, while Sarah grabbed Jake and pulled him further away from the violence. "Call 911. Marcus gasped between punches, tasting blood in his mouth. "Get security." But Sarah was already on her phone, her voice sharp and commanding as she gave their location to the emergency dispatcher. Jake was crying, but he was alive and unharmed, and that knowledge gave Marcus strength, even as he felt his own strength beginning to ebb. David caught him with an uppercut that snapped his head back, but Marcus used the momentum to drive his knee into David's solar plexus. They separated for a moment, both breathing hard, both bleeding from various cuts and scrapes. "It's over, David," Marcus said, trying to keep his voice steady, despite the fire spreading through his chest. "The police are coming. Just stay down." But David wasn't listening. His eyes had found the gun's location under the car, and he was already moving toward it with single-minded determination. Marcus threw himself forward again, ignoring the white-hot agony that flared through his torso. His tackle caught David around the waist, and they slammed into the side of a BMW with enough force to set off the car alarm. The wailing siren added another layer of chaos to the scene, but Marcus barely heard it over the sound of his own labored breathing. The bullet wound was worse than he'd initially thought. He could feel blood soaking through his shirt, could taste copper in the back of his throat. David was weakening too, his movements becoming sluggish as the adrenaline began to wear off and the reality of his situation set in. They were both on the ground now, more wrestling than fighting, both too exhausted and hurt to do much damage to each other. "Why?" David gasped, blood running from his nose. "Why did you have to interfere?" "Because," Marcus wheezed, using the last of his strength to pin David's arms, "that little boy deserves better than watching his father become a monster." David's resistance finally collapsed and he went limp beneath Marcus's weight. For a moment, the only sounds in the garage were their ragged breathing and the distant wail of approaching sirens. "I'm sorry," David whispered, and for the first time since the confrontation began, he sounded like a human being instead of a force of destruction. "God help me, I'm so sorry." Marcus rolled off him and lay on the concrete, staring up at the fluorescent lights that seemed to be dimming at the edges. Sarah was suddenly there, her hands pressing against his chest, trying to stem the bleeding. "Stay with me," she said, and he could see tears in her eyes. "The paramedics are almost here. Just stay with me." "Emma," Marcus whispered the word, taking enormous effort. "My daughter. School pickup. 3:15. What's her name?" "What school?" "Emma Hayes. Lincoln Elementary. Mrs. Peterson's class." Sarah nodded, her business mind automatically filing away the information. "I'll make sure she's taken care of. I promise." Marcus tried to smile, but his face felt heavy and disconnected. Tell her Daddy kept his promise. Tell her I'll always be her hero." "You can tell her yourself. You're going to be fine." But Marcus could feel himself slipping away, the concrete growing cold beneath his back. In the distance, he could hear running footsteps and shouting voices. Security guards, paramedics, police officers responding to Sarah's call. "Why did you do it?" Sarah asked quietly, her voice barely audible over the approaching chaos. "You don't even know us." Marcus looked at her, this powerful woman who had built an empire but couldn't protect herself from one broken man's rage, and then at Jake, who was peering around a concrete pillar with wide, frightened eyes. "Because," he whispered, each word a struggle, "everyone deserves a hero in their story." The paramedics arrived in a flurry of equipment and urgent voices, pushing Sarah aside as they worked to stabilize Marcus's condition. She watched them load him onto a stretcher, watched the blood-soaked gauze and the IV lines and the oxygen mask that covered half his face. David was in handcuffs now, being led away by police officers, his head hanging in shame and defeat. He looked back once at Jake, and the naked anguish in his expression was almost too painful to witness. "I love you, son," he called out, his voice breaking. "Whatever happens, remember that I love you." Jake didn't respond, just pressed closer to his mother, but Sarah saw him watching his father disappear into the back of a police car. She knew that image would live in her son's memory forever, one more scar in a childhood that should have been filled with joy instead of trauma. As the ambulance pulled away with Marcus inside, Sarah found herself holding a stranger's blood on her hands and his daughter's future in her heart. Emma Hayes Lincoln, Elementary, Mrs. Peterson's class, 3:15 pickup. She looked at her watch. It was 2:47. "Come on, Jake," she said, taking her son's hand. "We have someone very important to meet." The drive to Lincoln Elementary passed in a blur of traffic lights and racing thoughts. Sarah's mind was already 3 steps ahead, planning and organizing and trying to make sense of what had just happened. A man she'd never met had risked his life for her, and Jake had taken a bullet meant for a stranger's family. Now that stranger's daughter was waiting at school for a father who might not survive the day, and Sarah was the only person who could bridge that gap. Jake sat silently in the passenger seat, staring out the window at the passing cityscape. He hadn't spoken since the shooting, but Sarah could see him processing, trying to make sense of the violence and chaos that had erupted around them. "That man saved us," she said finally, not sure if she was talking to Jake or to herself. "Is he going to die?" Jake's voice was small and uncertain. "I don't know, baby. The doctors are going to do everything they can to help him." "What about his little girl?" Sarah's throat tightened. We're going to take care of her. Whatever she needs, whatever happens, we're going to make sure she's okay. They pulled into the Lincoln Elementary parking lot at 3:12, just as the first wave of children began spilling out of the building. Sarah scanned the crowd looking for a little girl who would be waiting for a father who couldn't come. She didn't have to look long. Emma Hayes was standing apart from the other children, her unicorn backpack at her feet, her face pressed against the school's front window as she searched the parking lot for a familiar truck that would never arrive. Sarah's heels clicked against the polished linoleum as she approached the school's front office. Jake's small hand clutched tightly in hers. Through the glass doors, she could see Emma Hayes still standing by the window, her small frame silhouetted against the afternoon light. The sight sent a sharp pain through Sarah's chest. This little girl had no idea that her world had just been turned upside down. "Mrs. Peterson," Sarah called out as they entered the main hallway. A woman in her 50s turned around, her kind eyes immediately focusing on Jake's tear-stained face. "Oh my, what happened to you, sweetheart?" Mrs. Peterson knelt down to Jake's level, her teacher instincts kicking in. "There was an accident," Sarah said quickly. "I'm Sarah Dalton. I need to speak with you about Emma Hayes. Her father, he's been hurt. He asked me to make sure she got home safely." Mrs. Peterson's expression shifted from concern to alarm. "Marcus, is he all right? Emma's been waiting by the window for 20 minutes. She said he's never late." "He's at the hospital. I don't have all the details yet, but he specifically asked me to take care of Emma." The teacher studied Sarah's face, taking in the expensive suit, the designer handbag, the obvious wealth that marked her as someone from a different world entirely than Marcus Hayes. "And you are?" "Someone who owes him everything," Sarah said simply. Mrs. Peterson nodded, slowly, understanding passing between them without need for further explanation. "Emma, sweetheart, come here. There's someone I'd like you to meet." Emma turned from the window, her auburn curls catching the late afternoon light. Her eyes were the same warm brown as her father's, but they held a wisdom that no 7-year-old should possess, the wariness of a child who had already learned that adults could disappear without warning. "Is my daddy coming?" Emma asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Sarah knelt down to Emma's eye level, her heart breaking at the hope and fear warring in the little girl's expression. "Emma, my name is Sarah. Your daddy asked me to come get you today. He had to go to the hospital, but he wanted me to make sure you were safe." "Is he sick?" Emma's bottom lip trembled. "He wasn't sick this morning. He made me pancakes shaped like butterflies." "He's hurt, sweetheart, but the doctors are taking very good care of him. He told me to tell you that he loves you to the moon and back." "And around all the stars," Emma finished automatically, tears beginning to spill down her cheeks. "That's what we always say." Sarah felt her own eyes burning. "He told me that too. He made me promise to take care of you until he gets better." Jake stepped forward, then his own trauma temporarily forgotten in the face of another child's pain. "My mommy says the doctors at the hospital are really good. They helped my friend Tyler when he broke his arm." Emma looked at Jake with curious eyes. "Who are you?" "I'm Jake. Your daddy saved me and my mom today. He's a real hero." The simple honesty in Jake's voice seemed to reach Emma in a way that adult reassurances couldn't. She wiped her nose with the back of her hand and picked up her unicorn backpack. "Can we go see him?" she asked Sarah. "Not right now, sweetheart, but I promise we'll go as soon as the doctors say it's okay. In the meantime, how would you feel about coming to stay with Jake and me?" Emma's eyes widened. "I don't know you." "You're right, you don't. But your daddy trusted me enough to ask me to take care of you. Do you think you could trust me too? Just until he's better?" The little girl considered this with the gravity of someone much older. "Will you call the hospital to check on him?" "Every hour if you want me to." "Okay." Emma's voice was small but determined. "But I want to go home first. I need to get Mr. Buttons. Daddy says Mr. Buttons keeps the nightmares away." Sarah's throat constricted. "Of course we can get Mr. Buttons. Who is he?" "My stuffed elephant. Daddy gave him to me when Mommy went away. He said elephants never forget the people they love. The drive to the Riverside Towers apartment complex was a journey from one world to another. Sarah's Mercedes felt ridiculously ostentatious as they pulled into the parking lot of the rundown building where Marcus had been raising his daughter on hope and determination alone. Emma led them up 2 flights of stairs to apartment 2B, her small hand digging into her backpack for a key that seemed too big for her tiny fingers. The door opened to reveal a space that was small but immaculately clean, filled with the kind of love that couldn't be bought or sold. The living room held a threadbare couch and a coffee table covered with Emma's drawings. A stack of bills sat on the kitchen counter next to a jar labeled Emma's College Fund that contained maybe $20 in crumpled bills and loose change. On the refrigerator, a dozen crayon masterpieces were held up by alphabet magnets, each one signed with Emma's careful handwriting. "This is Mr. Buttons," Emma said, emerging from what Sarah assumed was her bedroom with a well-loved stuffed elephant whose ears were worn smooth from countless nights of comfort. Jake examined the toy with serious consideration. "He looks very brave." "He is. Daddy says he's the bravest elephant in the whole world." Emma clutched Mr. Buttons to her chest and looked around the apartment with suddenly uncertain eyes. "When is Daddy coming home?" Sarah knelt down again, choosing her words carefully. "Emma, your daddy is very hurt. He might have to stay at the hospital for a while. Would it be okay if you stayed with us during that time? We have a big house with lots of room, and Jake would love to have a friend to play with. But what if Daddy comes home and I'm not here?" "Then we'll bring you straight back, I promise. But right now, your daddy wants to know that you're safe and happy. Can you be safe and happy with us?" Emma looked around her small apartment one more time, taking in the familiar sights that represented the only stability she'd ever known. Then she looked at Jake, who was examining her drawings with genuine interest, and at Sarah, whose expensive clothes couldn't hide the genuine care in her eyes. "Okay," she said finally, "but I want to leave a note for Daddy, in case he comes home before I do." "No." Sarah watched Emma carefully write out a note in crayon, her tongue poking out in concentration. "Dear Daddy, I went to stay with the lady who you saved. Her name is Sarah, and she has a boy named Jake. I took Mr. Buttons. Please get better soon. Love, Emma. P.S. There are leftover pancakes in the fridge." The note was secured to the refrigerator with a butterfly magnet, a tiny beacon of hope in the gathering darkness of uncertainty. An hour later, they were pulling through the gates of Sarah's estate in the hills overlooking the city. Emma pressed her face against the car window, her eyes wide with wonder at the manicured grounds and the sprawling Tudor-style mansion that rose before them like something from a fairy tale. "You live here," she breathed. "We live here," Sarah corrected gently, "for as long as you need us to." Maria, Sarah's housekeeper, met them at the front door with the efficiency of someone who had worked for the Dalton family for 15 years. Sarah quickly explained the situation while Maria's warm brown eyes assessed Emma with the practiced gaze of someone who had helped raise Jake from infancy. "The blue room," Maria suggested. "It has the best view of the garden, and it's right next to Master Jake's room." "Perfect. Maria, could you help Emma get settled while I make some calls, and maybe see if we can find some clothes that might fit her?" "Of course, Mrs. Dalton. Come, little one. Let's get you something to eat. You look like you could use some of my famous chocolate chip cookies." Emma looked back at Sarah uncertainly. "You'll call the hospital. Right now, I promise." Sarah retreated to her study, closing the door behind her as she dialed the hospital's main number. Getting information proved more challenging than she'd anticipated. Privacy laws and the fact that she wasn't family created bureaucratic obstacles that her usual influence couldn't easily overcome. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but I can only release information to immediate family members," the nurse explained for the third time. "I'm the person he saved," Sarah said, frustration creeping into her voice. "I'm the one responsible for his being there in the first place. His daughter is staying with me and she needs to know how her father is doing." A pause. Then, "Let me see if I can find Dr. Martinez. He might be able to tell you something." 5 minutes later, a tired voice came on the line. "Mrs. Dalton, this is Dr. Martinez. I understand Mr. Hayes was injured protecting you and your son." "Yes, how is he?" "He's stable but critical. The bullet punctured his lung and nicked an artery. We've stopped the bleeding and reinflated the lung, but he's lost a lot of blood. He's unconscious right now. Sarah closed her eyes, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders like lead. Will he? The next 24 hours are crucial. He's young and strong, which is in his favor. But I won't lie to you, it could go either way. When can his daughters see him? Not until he's stable and awake. I'm sorry. I know this is difficult, especially for a child. Sarah thanked the doctor and hung up, staring out the window at the perfectly manicured grounds where Emma and Jake were now playing with a soccer ball under Maria's watchful eye. Emma was laughing at something Jake had said, her small face momentarily free from worry, and Sarah felt a fierce protectiveness rise in her chest. This little girl had already lost one parent to abandonment. She would not lose another to violence, not if Sarah had anything to say about it. Her phone buzzed with an incoming call from her attorney, Richard Blackwood. Sarah, I heard about what happened. Are you and Jake all right? We're fine, thanks to a man named Marcus Hayes. Richard, I need you to look into something for me. Marcus has a daughter, Emma, and from what I saw of their apartment, they're struggling financially. I want to know about any debts, any legal issues, anything that might affect that little girl's future. I'll get my investigator on it immediately. What are you thinking? Sarah watched Emma attempt to kick the soccer ball, her small legs no match for its size, while Jake patiently demonstrated the proper technique. I'm thinking that a man who would take a bullet for strangers deserves better than to worry about eviction notices and medical bills. Sarah, you can't save everyone. Maybe not, but I can save the people who saved me. That evening, Sarah sat in Emma's temporary bedroom reading from a worn copy of Goodnight Moon, while Emma clutched Mr. Buttons and fought against sleep. The little girl's eyes kept darting to the window as if she expected to see her father's truck pulling up the circular drive. Will you really call the hospital again tomorrow? Emma asked for the fourth time. First thing in the morning, and if there's any change at all, I'll tell you immediately. Promise. I promise. Emma was quiet for a long moment, then, why did Daddy save you? He doesn't even know you. Sarah set the book aside and really looked at this remarkable child, this little girl who was holding together with the kind of strength that most adults never found. I think your daddy is the kind of person who can't see someone in trouble without trying to help, even if it's dangerous for him. That's what he did when Mommy was being mean. He tried to help, but she didn't want help. She wanted to leave. The casual way Emma mentioned her mother's abandonment broke Sarah's heart all over again. Sometimes grown-ups make choices that don't make sense to anyone else, but that doesn't mean it was your fault or your daddy's fault. I know. Daddy explained it to me. He said sometimes people get lost and they don't know how to find their way back home. Your daddy sounds very wise. He is. He knows how to fix everything. Even when the lights went off because we couldn't pay the electric bill, he made it fun. We camped in the living room and told stories by flashlight. Sarah felt her chest tighten. Here was a man who had been struggling to keep the lights on, and yet he'd risked his life for strangers without a moment's hesitation. The contrast between Marcus's nobility and David's selfishness was so stark it was almost painful to contemplate. Emma, what if I told you that your daddy doesn't have to worry about electric bills anymore? What if I told you that no matter what happens, you and he will always have everything you need? Emma's eyes widened. Are you like a fairy godmother? Despite everything, Sarah found herself smiling. Something like that. Jake appeared in the doorway, his own stuffed animal, a dragon named Spike, tucked under his arm. Can I stay with Emma tonight in case she gets scared? Sarah looked at both children, these two small souls who had found each other in the aftermath of trauma, and felt something shift in her chest. For the first time since her divorce, her house felt like a home. I think that's a wonderful idea, but only if Emma wants company. Emma nodded eagerly. I'd like that. Jake, do you want to see my drawings? As the children settled in together, Sarah retreated to her study to make more phone calls. By midnight, she had spoken to the hospital 3 more times, consulted with 2 different medical specialists, and arranged for Marcus to be moved to a private room with round-the-clock nursing care. She had also had a lengthy conversation with Richard Blackwood about setting up a trust fund, paying off Marcus's debts, and ensuring that Emma's future was secured regardless of what happened over the next few days. "You're moving very fast on this," Richard cautioned. "You've known these people for exactly 1 day." "Sometimes 1 day is enough," Sarah replied. "Sometimes 1 moment is enough." At 2 in the morning, she finally allowed herself to think about what had happened in that parking garage, to really process the fact that she and Jake could have died, if not for a stranger's courage. David's rage, his desperation, the cold weight of the gun in his hand, it all came flooding back with visceral clarity. But what stayed with her most was Marcus's voice, calm and steady, even with a gun pointed at his chest. Everyone deserves a hero in their story. Sarah had built her empire believing that strength came from independence, from never needing anyone else, from being untouchable at the top of her tower. But Marcus had shown her a different kind of strength, the strength to stand between danger and innocence, to sacrifice for people you'd never met, to choose love over fear in the space of a heartbeat. She was still awake when the phone rang at 5:17 a.m. Dr. Martinez's voice was tired but cautiously optimistic. "Mrs. Dalton, I wanted to let you know that Mr. Hayes regained consciousness about an hour ago. He's stable and his vitals are improving. He's asking about his daughter." Sarah felt tears she hadn't realized she was holding back spill down her cheeks. "Can I bring her to see him?" "Give us a few more hours to make sure he's truly stable. But yes, I think that would be good for both of them." Sarah hung up and walked quietly upstairs to check on the children. She found them both fast asleep in Emma's bed, Jake's arm thrown protectively over Emma's shoulders, while she clutched Mr. Buttons to her chest. Even in sleep, they had found a way to comfort each other. Standing in the doorway, Sarah realized that something fundamental had changed in her life. 24 hours ago, her world had been carefully controlled, precisely ordered with every element in its proper place. Now it was beautifully chaotic, filled with stuffed animals and children's laughter, and the messy, complicated reality of caring about people who couldn't be managed or predicted or controlled. For the first time in years, Sarah felt truly alive. When Emma woke up 2 hours later, the first words out of her mouth were, "Did you call the hospital?" "I didn't need to," Sarah said, sitting on the edge of the bed with a smile. "They called me. Your daddy is awake and he's asking for you." Emma shot upright so fast she nearly knocked Jake out of bed. "Can we go see him right now?" "As soon as you're dressed and fed. Maria is making pancakes shaped like butterflies, just like your daddy does." Emma's face crumpled with emotion, joy and relief, and overwhelming love for the father who had kept his promise to always be her hero. Jake sat up and rubbed his eyes, instantly alert to his new friend's emotional state. "Is he really okay?" Jake asked. "He's going to be fine," Sarah said, and for the first time since this whole ordeal began, she truly believed it. The drive to the hospital was filled with nervous energy and excited chatter. Emma had insisted on bringing one of her drawings for her father, a new masterpiece featuring 3 stick figures under a rainbow with "Thank you for saving us" written in careful 7-year-old handwriting across the top. "Do you think he'll like it?" Emma asked for the 10th time. "I think he'll love it," Sarah assured her. "I think it might be the best medicine he could possibly have." As they pulled into the hospital parking lot, Sarah felt a flutter of nerves. This was the moment when everything would become real, when the strange intimacy of crisis would either deepen into something lasting or fade back into the polite distance of strangers who had shared one extraordinary day. She thought about Marcus lying in that hospital bed, probably wondering what had happened to the woman and child he'd risked everything to save. She thought about the man who had taken a bullet for her family and then worried about his daughter, even as his own life hung in the balance. "Everyone deserves a hero in their story," he had said. But what Marcus didn't understand yet was that he hadn't just saved their lives that day. He had saved their hearts, their faith in human goodness, their belief that love could triumph over fear. Now it was Sarah's turn to be the hero in someone else's story. The elevator ride to the 4th floor seemed to take forever. Emma bouncing on her toes with barely contained excitement while Jake held her hand in silent support. When the doors finally opened, Sarah led them down the hallway toward room 412, her heart pounding with an anticipation she couldn't quite name. Through the small window in the door, she could see Marcus propped up in bed, his chest wrapped in bandages, but his eyes clear and alert. He looked pale but alive, beautifully and completely alive. Sarah knocked gently and pushed the door open. "Someone's here to see you." Marcus's face transformed the moment he saw Emma, love and relief washing over his features like sunlight after storm. "Hey there, Butterfly. Come here." Emma rushed to his bedside, carefully avoiding the various tubes and wires as she threw her arms around his neck. "Daddy, I was so scared. Sarah said you were a hero and the doctors were taking good care of you. But I didn't know if you were going to be okay, and I drew you a picture. And Jake stayed with me last night and—" "Slow down, sweetheart." Marcus laughed, his voice rough but warm. "I'm okay. I'm right here." Sarah watched father and daughter reunite, feeling like an intruder on a private moment of pure love. But then Marcus looked over Emma's head and caught her eye, and the gratitude in his expression was so profound it took her breath away. "Thank you," he mouthed silently. Sarah knotted her throat too tight for words. This was just the beginning, she realized. This moment, this choice, this leap of faith into the unknown, it was all just the beginning of a story none of them could have imagined writing. Jake stepped forward shyly, still clutching his dragon spike, and Marcus's attention shifted to the boy whose life had started this whole chain of events. "And you must be Jake," Marcus said, his voice gentle despite the pain medication making his words slightly slurred. "Your mom told me about you while we were waiting for the ambulance." "Are you really okay?" Jake asked, his green eyes wide with concern. I was afraid you might die because of us." "Hey, now." Marcus reached out his free hand, the one not wrapped around Emma, and Jake took it tentatively. "What happened wasn't because of you. What happened was because your father was hurting and angry, and sometimes hurting people do things that don't make sense. But that's not your fault, buddy, not even a little bit." Jake's lower lip trembled. "But if you hadn't been there, I never would have met the bravest little boy in the world, or his amazing mom who's been taking better care of Emma than I could have dreamed." Sarah felt her cheeks warm as Marcus's eyes found hers again. There was something different in his gaze now, something deeper than gratitude, but not quite definable. She cleared her throat, suddenly feeling like a teenager with her first crush, instead of a powerful CEO who commanded boardrooms full of intimidating men. "The doctors say you'll need to stay here for at least another week," she said, moving closer to the bed. "Emma's been worried sick about you." "I brought you a picture, Daddy," Emma said, carefully unfolding her artwork. "It's you and me and Sarah and Jake under a rainbow. Because rainbows come after storms, and you said storms don't last forever." Marcus studied the drawing with the seriousness it deserved, his thumb tracing over the careful crayon lines. "It's perfect, Butterfly. Absolutely perfect. Sarah has a really big house." Emma continued, settling into the chair beside his bed like she planned to stay forever. "And Maria makes cookies that taste like heaven. And Jake showed me his room, and it has a telescope so we can see the stars. And there's a pool. But Sarah said we have to wait until you say it's okay for me to swim. And—" "Emma," Marcus interrupted gently, "you've been staying at Sarah's house." The question hung in the air between them, loaded with implications neither adult was quite ready to address. Sarah felt her heart rate pick up as she realized this was the moment when their arrangement would either be accepted or questioned, when Marcus would either trust her with his most precious possession or politely reclaim his daughter and disappear from their lives forever. "I hope that's all right," Sarah said carefully. "When you asked me to take care of Emma, I didn't want to put her with strangers or in the system. She seemed comfortable with us, and Jake loves having her around." Marcus looked at his daughter, really looked at her, taking in her clean clothes, her bright eyes, the way she seemed more relaxed than he'd seen her in months. Then he looked at Jake, who was quietly examining the various medical equipment with the curiosity of a child who felt safe enough to explore. Finally, his gaze settled on Sarah, and she saw something shift in his expression. A decision being made, a trust being offered. You took her into your home, he said quietly. A complete stranger's child. She's not a stranger's child, Sarah replied. She's the daughter of the man who saved my son's life. That makes her family. The word hung between them, heavy with meaning and possibility. Marcus felt something tight in his chest loosen, something he hadn't even realized he'd been holding on to since Jessica had walked out the door 2 years ago. The belief that he and Emma were fundamentally alone in the world. I don't know how to thank you, he said, his voice rough with emotion. You don't need to thank me. You've already given me more than you know. Dr. Martinez chose that moment to knock on the door, breaking the charged atmosphere with his professional demeanor. Mr. Hayes, good to see you awake and alert. How are you feeling? Like I got shot, Marcus said wryly, making Emma giggle despite her worry. But better than yesterday, I'm sure. Your recovery has been remarkable, actually. The surgery went better than we hoped, and your body is responding well to treatment. I'd like to keep you for observation for another 5 or 6 days, just to be sure there are no complications. Sarah saw Marcus's face tighten with worry, and she knew exactly what he was thinking about medical bills, lost wages, the mounting expenses of an extended hospital stay on top of everything else he was already struggling to manage. Doctor, she interjected smoothly, I'll need you to transfer all of Mr. Hayes' medical expenses to my account. He's under my family's insurance now. Marcus turned to stare at her, his brown eyes wide with shock. Sarah, you can't... It's already done, she said firmly. Dr. Martinez, please make sure Mr. Hayes has everything he needs for his recovery. Private room, private nursing care, whatever it takes. Sarah? We can discuss it later, she said, her tone brooking no argument. Right now, you need to focus on getting better so you can come home. The word slipped out before she could stop it, and they all heard it. Home. Not his apartment, not his life, but home with them. Sarah felt her cheeks burn, but she didn't take it back. Emma clapped her hands together excitedly. Does that mean Daddy's coming to live with us? The question hung in the air like a challenge, and Sarah realized she was holding her breath, waiting for Marcus's response. This was moving so fast, too fast probably, but everything about the last 2 days had defied conventional wisdom and social expectations. Sweetheart, Marcus said carefully. Sarah has already done so much for us. We can't just assume... Actually, Sarah interrupted, surprising herself with her boldness. I was hoping we could talk about that. Not right now, not with everything you're dealing with, but soon. I have a proposition for you. A proposition. A job offer. My company needs a head of security, someone I can trust completely. Someone who's proven he'll put himself between danger and the people he's protecting. The salary would be substantial. Enough to give Emma everything she needs and deserves. Marcus stared at her for a long moment, processing not just the offer, but everything it implied: a complete change of life, a leap into the unknown, a future he'd never dared to imagine for himself and his daughter. You don't even know if I'm qualified, he said finally. You're qualified, Sarah replied with absolute certainty. You're more than qualified. Dr. Martinez cleared his throat awkwardly. I should let you all discuss this privately. Mr. Hayes, I'll check on you again this evening. Mrs. Dalton, if you have any questions about his care, please don't hesitate to call. After the doctor left the room, fell silent, except for the quiet hum of medical equipment. Emma had curled up in the chair beside her father's bed, exhausted by the emotional intensity of the reunion. Jake sat on the small couch by the window, giving the family space, while staying close enough to feel included. This is crazy, Marcus said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. 2 days ago, I was about to be evicted. Now you're offering me a job I probably don't deserve, and a life I definitely don't deserve. You deserve everything good this world has to offer, Sarah said fiercely. You deserve safety and security and the knowledge that your daughter will never have to worry about where her next meal is coming from or whether the lights will stay on. And what do you get out of it? The question was direct, honest, and Sarah found herself struggling to put her feelings into words. What did she get out of it? Peace of mind, certainly. The knowledge that the man who had saved her son was being taken care of, but it was more than that, deeper than mere gratitude. I get to sleep at night knowing that there are still good people in the world, she said finally. I get to watch my son learn what real courage looks like. I get to see Emma grow up in a house filled with love instead of worry. And Sarah looked at him, this man who saw through her careful corporate speak to the truth underneath. And I get to not be alone anymore. Really, truly not alone. The admission hung between them, vulnerable and raw. Marcus reached out and took her hand, his calloused fingers intertwining with her manicured ones. Sarah, I need you to understand something. I'm not looking for a handout or a rescue. If I take this job, if I bring Emma into your world, it's because I can contribute something meaningful. I won't be your charity case. You won't be. I've seen what you're capable of, Marcus. I've seen your courage, your integrity, your heart. I need those qualities in my life, in Jake's life. Not because I feel sorry for you, but because I respect you more than anyone I've ever met. Marcus studied her face, looking for any sign of pity or condescension, but finding only sincerity and something that looked remarkably like hope. This could change everything. Everything's already changed. Emma stirred in her chair, her sleepy voice cutting through the charged atmosphere. Daddy, are we going to live with Sarah and Jake? Marcus looked at his daughter, this little girl who had already been through so much upheaval in her young life, and saw nothing but excitement and hope in her expression. She had bonded with Jake, felt safe with Sarah, found a place where she could be a child, instead of worrying about adult problems. Would you like that butterfly? Yes, Jake says they have a library with real books, and Sarah promised to teach me how to swim, and Maria says she'll show me how to make those cookies, and there's room for Mr. Buttons and all my drawings, and... Okay. Marcus laughed, the sound painful but genuine. I think that's a yes. Sarah felt tears prick at her eyes as the last piece of her carefully constructed life crumbled away, replaced by something messy and complicated and infinitely more beautiful. Over the next several days, as Marcus slowly regained his strength, the new reality of their intertwined lives began to take shape. Sarah found herself spending every free moment at the hospital, bringing Jake and Emma for daily visits, coordinating with doctors and insurance companies, and having long conversations with Marcus about everything from his work history to his hopes for Emma's future. She learned that he had served in the Army for 4 years after high school, working in military police, before being honorably discharged and returning home to care for his ailing mother. He'd met Jessica at a community college where he was studying criminal justice, and they'd married young, maybe too young, with dreams that didn't quite align. When his mother died, Jessica had inherited not just his grief, but his financial struggles, and the pressure had slowly eroded whatever love they'd shared. She wasn't a bad person, Marcus said one afternoon while Emma and Jake played quietly in the corner of his hospital room. She was just young and scared and overwhelmed. I don't blame her for leaving. I blame her for how she left, but not for leaving. Sarah found herself sharing stories too, telling him about her father's death when Jake was just 2, about the pressure of running a company while trying to be a single mother, about David's slow descent from supportive husband to resentful dependent. He used to be different, she said, watching Jake help Emma with a jigsaw puzzle. When we first met, he was ambitious and driven. But somewhere along the way, my success became his failure in his mind. Every promotion I got, every deal I closed, it was just more evidence that he wasn't enough. That must have been hard. The hardest part was watching Jake start to walk on eggshells around his own father. No child should have to do that. And now. Sarah looked at Jake, who was patiently explaining puzzle strategies to Emma with the kind of gentle authority that reminded her powerfully of Marcus. Now he's learning what it looks like when a man protects instead of intimidating, when strength is used to build up instead of tear down. Their conversations ranged from practical matters like insurance and school enrollment to deeper questions about values and parenting and what they wanted their children to learn from their example. Sarah found herself looking forward to these talks more than any business meeting or social obligation, found herself checking her phone constantly for texts from Marcus, even when she was in important negotiations. Richard Blackwood noticed the change immediately. "You're distracted," he said during a board meeting, pulling her aside afterward. "Your mind is somewhere else entirely." I'm fine, Richard. You're many things, Sarah, but fine isn't one of them. You're either having some kind of breakdown or you're falling in love. Given the circumstances, I'm not sure which one would be more concerning. Sarah felt heat creep up her neck. Don't be ridiculous. I'm simply ensuring that the man who saved Jake's life is properly taken care of. It's the least I can do. Uh-huh. And the fact that you've restructured your entire security department to create a position that didn't exist a week ago. That's just prudent business practice. Marcus Hayes is uniquely qualified to head our security operations. His military background, his situational awareness, his willingness to put the company's interests above his own safety. Sarah. Richard's voice was gentle but firm. I've known you for 15 years. I've seen you navigate hostile takeovers and bitter custody battles without batting an eye. But mention this man's name and you light up like a Christmas tree. Just be careful, okay? You're making life-changing decisions based on one day of extreme circumstances. But Sarah knew it was more than one day. It was the way Marcus listened to Emma's rambling stories with complete attention. It was how he remembered details about Jake's interests and asked thoughtful questions about school and friends. It was the gentleness in his touch when he held her hand, the respect in his voice when he disagreed with her ideas, the way he looked at her like she was more than just her achievements and net worth. It was the way she felt when she was with him, not like Sarah Dalton, the CEO, or Sarah Dalton, the divorcee, or Sarah Dalton, the struggling single mother, but just Sarah. Just herself, complex and flawed and worthy of love. On Marcus's 5th day in the hospital, Jake came down with a stomach bug that kept him home from school. Sarah was torn between staying with Jake and visiting Marcus until Emma solved the problem in her straightforward 7-year-old way. I'll take care of Jake, she announced. I know how to make sick people feel better. Daddy taught me when he had the flu last winter. Sarah watched in amazement as Emma took charge, bringing Jake crackers and ginger ale, reading to him from one of his favorite books, and generally being the most competent caretaker a 9-year-old could ask for. When she finally made it to the hospital that evening, she found Marcus sitting up in bed, looking stronger than he had since the shooting. How's Jake feeling? He asked immediately. Better, thanks to your daughter. She's been taking care of him all day, like a little nurse. She's had practice, Marcus said with a mixture of pride and sadness. There were some rough patches after Jessica left when I wasn't handling things as well as I should have. Emma learned to take care of people because she had to. She won't have to anymore, Sarah said firmly. Neither of you will have to handle anything alone anymore. Marcus reached for her hand and she settled into the chair that had become her regular spot beside his bed. Sarah, I need to ask you something and I need you to be completely honest with me. Okay. Are you doing this because you feel guilty? Because you think you owe me something? Because if that's what this is, if this is some kind of elaborate thank you gift, I need to know now before Emma gets any more attached. Sarah considered the question seriously, examining her own motivations with the same scrutiny she applied to business decisions. Was guilt part of it? Of course. Was gratitude a factor? Absolutely. But underneath those surface emotions was something deeper. Something that had been growing every day since she'd first seen him across that parking garage. I'm doing this because I can't imagine my life without you in it, she said quietly. I'm doing this because Jake lights up every time he sees you, because Emma deserves to grow up feeling safe and loved, because I've spent the last 5 years building walls around my heart, and somehow you managed to walk right through them. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, studying her face in the dim hospital lighting. And if I said I was falling in love with you, if I said that somewhere between the parking garage and right now I started imagining a future that includes all of us. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. I'd say that makes 2 of us. Even though we barely know each other, we know the important things. We know how we handle crisis. We know how we treat children. We know what we're willing to sacrifice for the people we care about. And you think that's enough to build a life on? Sarah leaned forward and kissed him softly, tasting possibility and promise, and the sweetest kind of risk. I think it's enough to start. The kiss was interrupted by a knock on the door, followed immediately by Emma's voice calling, "Daddy, we brought you ice cream." They broke apart, both laughing as Emma burst through the door, followed by Jake, who was looking significantly better than he had that morning. Maria brought up the rear, carrying a bag that undoubtedly contained homemade soup and fresh flowers, and all the other maternal touches that had been missing from Marcus's life for far too long. "How are you feeling, mijo?" Maria asked immediately, setting about rearranging his pillows and checking his water pitcher with the efficiency of someone who had been caring for people her entire life. "Much better, Maria. Thank you for looking after the kids today." "Those children are angels," Maria said firmly. "Little Emma, she helped Jake all day, so gentle and caring. And Jake, he shared all his books and toys without being asked. You and Mrs. Dalton, you've raised good children." Sarah felt a warm glow at being included in the compliment, at being seen as part of a parenting team instead of a woman struggling alone to raise her son. This was what family felt like, she realized. Not perfect or uncomplicated, but full of love and support, and the kind of everyday care that made life worth living. "Daddy, guess what?" Emma had climbed carefully onto the bed beside him, mindful of his injuries. "Jake taught me how to play chess, and Sarah showed me her office, and Maria let me help make dinner, and tomorrow we're going to plant flowers in the garden." "Sounds like you've been busy, butterfly." "The best part is that Jake isn't sad anymore," Emma said, her 7-year-old wisdom cutting straight to the heart of things. "He was sad before when it was just him and Sarah, but now he laughs all the time." Sarah looked at her son, who was indeed more animated and joyful than she'd seen him in months. The constant undercurrent of tension that had defined their household during the worst parts of her marriage to David was gone, replaced by the easy warmth of a family that actually enjoyed being together. "What about you, Em?" Marcus asked. "Are you happy?" Emma considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. "I miss our old apartment sometimes because it was just ours, you know. But I like having Jake to play with, and Sarah reads really good bedtime stories, and Maria makes pancakes that are even better than yours." "Hey now," Marcus protested with mock indignation. "Better than mine, I don't believe it." "It's true," Jake chimed in. "But don't worry, Mr. Marcus. I like your pancakes too. Maybe you and Maria can teach each other your recipes." But the casual way Jake included Marcus in his vision of their shared future made Sarah's throat tight with emotion. This was happening, she realized. This beautiful, complicated, utterly unexpected blending of their lives was actually happening. Dr. Martinez appeared in the doorway with Marcus's discharge papers and a smile that suggested he was as ready for this reunion to move out of his hospital as everyone else was ready for it to happen. "Well, Mr. Hayes, it looks like you're ready to go home. Your recovery has been remarkable, honestly, one of the best I've seen. Just promise me you'll take it easy for the next few weeks. No heroics, no heavy lifting, and definitely no more stopping bullets with your chest." "I'll do my best, Doc. Mrs. Dalton, you'll make sure he follows orders." "With pleasure," Sarah said, earning a laugh from Marcus and an eye roll from both children. As they prepared to leave the hospital, Sarah felt a flutter of nervousness that had nothing to do with medical concerns and everything to do with the momentous nature of what they were doing. They were about to officially become a family, not through blood or marriage or legal adoption, but through choice and love and the kind of commitment that couldn't be documented on any official form. Marcus signed his discharge papers with hands that were steady and strong, then stood carefully and gathered Emma into his arms. She wrapped herself around him like she never planned to let go, and Sarah felt her heart squeeze at the pure love in that embrace. "Ready to go home?" she asked, offering Marcus her arm for support. He looked at her with eyes full of wonder and gratitude, and something that looked remarkably like forever. More than ready. Right. As they walked out of the hospital together, Sarah supporting Marcus, Emma skipping ahead with Jake, Maria following with flowers and get-well cards from concerned colleagues, Sarah realized that everything Richard had said was true. She was making life-changing decisions based on extraordinary circumstances. She was restructuring her entire existence around a man she'd known for less than a week, and she had never been more certain of anything in her entire life. The drive home was filled with excited chatter from the children and comfortable silence from the adults, each lost in their own thoughts about the future they were choosing together. As they pulled through the gates of the estate, Sarah saw Marcus take in the manicured grounds and impressive architecture with new eyes, not as a visitor anymore, but as someone who belonged there. "It's really happening," he said quietly, his voice full of wonder. "It's really happening," Sarah agreed, reaching over to squeeze his hand. "What if we mess it up? Then we'll figure it out together, all of us together." The first morning in their new life together dawned crisp and golden autumn sunlight streaming through the tall windows of the master suite where Sarah lay awake listening to the sounds of her transformed household. Down the hall she could hear Emma's delighted laughter mixing with Jake's deeper chuckles, and underneath it all, Marcus's warm voice, reading what sounded like the Chronicles of Narnia, with all the dramatic flair the story deserved. Sarah smiled into her pillow, marveling at how quickly the rhythms of their blended family had established themselves. Marcus had been home for 3 days now, and it felt like he'd always been there helping with homework at the kitchen table, teaching Jake proper push-up form in the backyard, letting Emma paint his nails bright pink because she needed to practice for when she became a famous nail artist. The transition hadn't been entirely seamless, of course. There had been moments of awkwardness conversations that revealed just how much they still had to learn about each other, small conflicts over everything from bedtimes to breakfast preferences. But underneath it all was a foundation of mutual respect and growing affection that made even the difficult moments feel like steps forward rather than obstacles. Sarah rose and padded barefoot to the window, looking out over the grounds where Maria was already tending to the flower beds. The housekeeper had taken to Marcus, immediately adopting him with the same maternal efficiency she'd once applied to Jake. Just yesterday, Sarah had found them in the kitchen, Maria teaching Marcus her secret tamale recipe, while he shared stories of his mother's Sunday dinners. "Mrs. Dalton," Maria had said, flour dusting her apron as she looked up from the masa. "This man, he has good hands for cooking, very gentle, very patient." Unlike me, Sarah had teased, remembering her own disastrous attempts at tamale making the previous Christmas. "You have good hands for other things, mija, but cooking, maybe we leave that to Marcus and me." Now, watching Maria work in the garden, Sarah felt a profound sense of rightness settle over her. This was what home was supposed to feel like, full of laughter and shared meals and the comfortable chaos of people who chose to love each other despite their differences. "Mama," Jake's voice carried down the hallway. "Marcus says he'll teach me how to throw a proper spiral if you say it's okay." Sarah slipped on her robe and headed toward the voices, following the sound of her new family to Jake's bedroom, where she found Marcus sitting on the edge of the bed with both children crowded around him. He was wearing one of the casual shirts she'd bought him during a shopping trip that had felt remarkably like playing house, and his color was better than it had been since the shooting, though she could still see him favoring his injured side. "Morning," he said, looking up as she appeared in the doorway. The smile he gave her was soft and intimate, full of promise for lazy Sunday mornings and shared coffee and all the small intimacies she'd forgotten could exist between two people who were falling in love. "Morning. What's this about football lessons?" "I was just telling Jake that in my expert opinion, his throwing form could use some work. Nothing that can't be fixed with proper instruction and practice." Jake bounced excitedly on the bed, his hair still sticking up at odd angles from sleep. "Can we? Mama, Marcus says he was quarterback in high school." "For 1 year," Marcus clarified with a laugh. "And we went 3-7 that season, so take that endorsement with a grain of salt." "I don't care if you were good," Jake said with the unwavering loyalty of childhood. "I just want to learn how to throw like you." Sarah felt her heart squeeze at the hero worship in her son's voice. Since David had left, Jake had been surrounded by accomplished, successful people. But Marcus was the first man who had shown him what quiet strength looked like, what it meant to be gentle without being weak. "As long as you're careful with your side," she said to Marcus, earning a grateful look that told her he understood what she was really saying, that she trusted him with her son's heart as well as his physical safety. "Always am," he replied, and she knew he was talking about more than football. Emma, not to be outdone by Jake's athletic ambitions, piped up from her position curled against Marcus's uninjured side. "And you said you'd help me build a fort in the oak tree." "After breakfast," Marcus promised. and after your dad's morning physical therapy session. The casual way Emma had started calling him Dad had surprised them all. It had started 3 days ago when she'd sleepily asked him to read her a bedtime story, and instead of saying Marcus, the word that came out was Daddy. She'd frozen immediately, her eyes wide with uncertainty, but Marcus had simply kissed her forehead and said, "What story would you like, sweetheart?" Now she switched seamlessly between Daddy Marcus and just Dad, as if he'd always held that role in her life. Sarah had worried initially about the psychological implications about attachment theory and the potential for confusion. But watching Marcus with Emma, seeing the complete devotion in his eyes every time she called him, Dad had put her fears to rest. Speaking of breakfast, Sarah said, "Maria's making her famous French toast. But first, Emma needs to get dressed and Jake needs to brush his teeth. I can smell his morning breath from here." "Hey," Jake protested even as he grinned and headed for his bathroom. "Marcus, does your breath smell bad in the morning?" "Terrible," Marcus admitted solemnly. "That's why I brush my teeth before I kiss your mom good morning." The casual reference to their physical intimacy made Sarah blush like a teenager, even though their relationship was still carefully chaste, limited to hand-holding and gentle kisses that left her wanting more, but respecting the complexity of their situation. "Ew." Emma giggled, scrambling off the bed. Grown-ups are so weird. As the children scattered to get ready for the day, Marcus stood carefully and moved towards Sarah, his eyes holding that mixture of tenderness and desire that made her pulse quicken. "Good morning," he said softly, reaching up to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear. "Good morning yourself. How are you feeling?" "Like the luckiest man alive." He kissed her then, soft and sweet and full of promise, and Sarah melted into him despite her awareness that two curious children could reappear at any moment. This was new territory for both of them, navigating physical attraction while building a foundation for their family, balancing adult desires with parental responsibilities. "Marcus," she whispered against his lips. "I know, I'm not pushing. I'm just grateful." "For what?" "For you. For this. For the chance to wake up every morning and know that this is real." Sarah felt tears prick at her eyes. "Even when Emma insists on braiding your hair. Especially then." They were interrupted by the sound of running feet and Jake's voice calling, "Are you guys kissing again? 'Cause Emma wants to see." "No!" Emma's mortified voice came from down the hall. "I do not." Marcus and Sarah broke apart, both laughing, and headed downstairs to join their children for breakfast. The kitchen was filled with the warm scents of cinnamon and vanilla, Maria bustling around with the efficient grace of someone who had perfected the art of feeding a family. "Good morning, mijos," she said, not looking up from the stove. "Coffee's fresh orange juice is in the fridge, and the French toast will be ready in 5 minutes. Sarah poured coffee for herself, and Marcus, noting how he automatically moved to help Maria with the plates. How he asked Jake about his upcoming science project. How he listened to Emma's detailed explanation of the fort plans with complete attention. This was what partnership looked like, she realized. Not the formal division of labor she'd tried to maintain during her marriage to David, but this easy collaboration where everyone contributed according to their abilities and inclinations. "So," Marcus said as they settled around the kitchen table, "what's the plan for today?" "Well," Sarah said, consulting her phone, "I have a few work calls this morning, but I should be free by noon. I thought we could go to the farmer's market, maybe pick up some pumpkins for carving." "Can we get caramel apples?" Emma asked hopefully. "And hot cider," Jake added. "And one of those enormous squash that looks like it could feed an army," Marcus suggested with a grin. "Done, done, and done," Sarah laughed. "But first, Marcus needs his physical therapy session, and you two need to finish your weekend homework." The physical therapy sessions were a twice-daily ritual that Sarah had insisted upon bringing in one of the city's best rehabilitation specialists to ensure that Marcus's recovery was complete and thorough. She'd initially expected him to resist what could have been seen as excessive pampering, but Marcus had surprised her by accepting the help gracefully. "I've got nothing to prove by being stubborn," he'd said when she'd asked about it. "Emma needs me healthy and whole. That's more important than my pride." As if summoned by her thoughts, Dr. Patricia Reeves arrived precisely at 10, her efficient professionalism softened by genuine warmth toward her patient. Sarah watched through the window as Marcus worked through his exercises in the sunroom, his movements careful but determined, and felt a fierce surge of admiration for his quiet strength. "He's remarkable," Dr. Reeves said, joining Sarah at the window during a break in the session. "I've seen a lot of patients with similar injuries, and most of them spend the first few weeks feeling sorry for themselves. Marcus seems more focused on getting back to his life than dwelling on what happened to him." "He has strong motivation," Sarah said, watching Marcus patiently help Emma with her math homework while Jake practiced his piano lesson. "Yes, I can see that. You've built something beautiful here, Mrs. Dalton." Sarah felt a warm glow at the words. "We're still figuring it out day by day. The best families always are." After Dr. Reeves left, Sarah found herself with an hour before her first conference call, and she decided to spend it in her study, trying to catch up on the paperwork that had been accumulating since Marcus's injury. But she found it almost impossible to concentrate with the sounds of her family echoing through the house, Marcus helping Emma with the art project, Jake practicing his presentation for social studies, Maria humming while she prepared lunch. Her attention was interrupted by a soft knock on the door. "Come in," she called, expecting to see one of the children. Instead, Marcus appeared in the doorway, looking slightly uncertain. "Sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to thank you for Dr. Reeves. She says I'm ahead of schedule for recovery." "That's wonderful news. How are you feeling?" "Stronger every day." Sarah: "I've been thinking about the job offer about starting work. I know you said there was no rush, but I'd like to begin as soon as Dr. Reeves clears me for full activity." Sarah set down her pen and really looked at him. "Are you sure you're ready?" "There's no pressure, Marcus. You could take another month, another 6 months if you needed to." "I know you'd let me, but I need to contribute, Sarah. I need to earn my place here, not just exist as your project or your charity case." "You're not my charity case," Sarah said firmly. "And you don't have to earn anything. You've already proven your worth in ways that have nothing to do with employment." "Maybe, but I still need to work. It's who I am." Sarah studied his face, recognizing the stubborn pride that had probably gotten him through military service and single parenthood and all the other challenges life had thrown at him. This wasn't about money or status. It was about dignity and purpose and the fundamental need to provide for the people he loved. "Okay," she said finally. "I'll talk to Richard about accelerating the security department restructuring. We could probably have you start with light duties within the next 2 weeks." "Thank you. But Marcus, the job offer was never contingent on gratitude or obligation. I meant what I said about needing someone I could trust completely. You're not getting this position because I feel sorry for you. You're getting it because you're exactly what my company needs." The smile he gave her was radiant with relief and anticipation. "I won't let you down." "I know you won't." He moved toward her desk then, and Sarah felt her pulse quicken as he leaned down to kiss her. This kiss was different from their morning greeting, deeper and more urgent, carrying a message that had nothing to do with gratitude and everything to do with desire. "Sarah," he murmured against her lips, and she heard a question in his voice. "I know," she whispered back. "I feel it too." "The kids are busy with their projects. Maria's in the kitchen. We have a few minutes." Marcus pulled her up from her chair, his hands framing her face as he kissed her again, more thoroughly this time. Sarah melted into him, her arms sliding around his neck, careful of his still healing injuries, but unable to resist the pull of attraction that had been building between them for days. "I've been wanting to do this since the hospital," he admitted, trailing kisses along her jaw. "Just this?" Sarah asked, her voice breathless. "You know it's not just this. Then what's stopping you?" Marcus pulled back to look at her, his brown eyes serious. "The kids. The newness of all this. The fact that I don't want to complicate something that's working so well. And if I said I was tired of taking things slow, if I said I wanted to complicate things, then I'd say you're killing me with kindness." Marcus groaned, resting his forehead against hers. "But I'd also say that we have the rest of our lives to figure out the physical part. Right now, I just want to make sure Jake and Emma feel secure in what we're building." Sarah felt a surge of love so intense it took her breath away. This man, this wonderful, thoughtful, impossibly noble man, was putting her children's emotional welfare above his own desires, above her desires, above the magnetic pull that existed between them. "Have I mentioned lately that you're perfect?" she said softly. "I'm far from perfect, but I'm trying to be worthy of you, of this family we're creating. You already are." Their moment was interrupted by Emma's voice calling from the hallway. "Dad, Jake's being mean to me." "Am not," Jake's indignant reply echoed back. "Duty calls," Marcus said with a rueful smile. "Go, I'll be out in a few minutes." Sarah watched him leave, then sank back into her chair, her body still humming with unfulfilled desire and her heart full of love for this man who understood instinctively how to balance adult needs with family responsibilities. The farmer's market that afternoon was a revelation of domestic happiness. Sarah had always enjoyed these weekend excursions with Jake, but adding Marcus and Emma to the mix transformed the experience into something magical. Emma was enchanted by everything: the rows of pumpkins, the kettle corn stand, the booth selling handmade soaps that smelled like lavender and honey. Marcus, despite still moving carefully because of his injuries, seemed to take genuine pleasure in the simple family outing. He helped Jake select the perfect pumpkin for carving, listened seriously to Emma's detailed plans for their fort, and held Sarah's hand as they wandered between the stalls like any other couple navigating the challenges and joys of a blended family. "You know," he said as they watched the children sample apple cider at one of the stands. 6 months ago, if someone had told me I'd be spending a Sunday afternoon at a farmer's market with a woman I was falling in love with and her son, I'd have said they were crazy. What would you have been doing instead? Working a second job probably, or trying to fix something in the apartment that was constantly breaking down. Definitely not buying organic vegetables that cost more than my weekly grocery budget used to be. Sarah squeezed his hand. "Any regrets?" "Only that it took getting shot for me to find you." "Marcus, I'm not saying I'm glad it happened, but I can't regret the outcome." They were interrupted by Emma running up with her cheeks sticky from caramel apple residue. "Dad, can we get one of those big pumpkins for the front porch? Jake says we need to make our house look festive." "Our house," Marcus repeated softly, and Sarah saw the wonder in his expression every time one of the children included him in their vision of home. "Our house," Emma confirmed matter-of-factly. "This is where we live now, right?" "Right," Marcus said, lifting her up carefully. "This is where we live now." The drive home was filled with excited planning for pumpkin carving and fort building and all the other weekend activities that had become the rhythm of their new life together. Sarah found herself cataloging these moments, storing them away like photographs. Marcus singing along to the radio with his terrible but enthusiastic voice. Emma and Jake giggling in the back seat, the late afternoon sun streaming through the car windows and illuminating their small, perfect world. That evening, after pumpkins had been carved and displayed, after fort plans had been sketched and approved, after the children had been read to and tucked in and kissed goodnight, Sarah and Marcus found themselves alone on the back patio, sharing a bottle of wine and watching the stars appear in the darkening sky. "I keep expecting the other shoe to drop," Sarah admitted, settling into the outdoor couch beside him. "This all feels too good to be real." "I know what you mean. Sometimes I wake up in that beautiful bedroom and think I'm dreaming. Then I hear Emma laughing with Jake, or Maria calling me mijo, or you humming while you make coffee, and I realize it's actually happening. Are you happy, Marcus? Really, truly happy?" He turned to look at her in the dim light from the house, his face serious. "I'm happier than I ever thought possible. But Sarah, I need you to know that I'm not just grateful or relieved or any of those things that might fade over time. I'm in love with you. Completely, terrifyingly, permanently in love with you." Sarah felt her breath catch. They'd been dancing around the words for days, but hearing them spoken aloud gave them a weight and reality that made her pulse quicken. "I love you too," she said simply. "I love the way you are with the children, the way you make me feel safe and desired and cherished all at once. I love that you read bedtime stories with different voices for every character, and that you always remember to ask Maria about her grandchildren, and that you look at me like I'm more than just my accomplishments. You are so much more than your accomplishments. I'm beginning to believe that. Marcus reached for her hand, intertwining their fingers in the gesture that had become as natural as breathing. So where do we go from here? Forward, together, one day at a time, even when it gets complicated, especially when it gets complicated. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the sounds of their neighborhood settling into evening dogs barking in the distance, cars turning into driveways, the soft murmur of other families ending their days with the same contentment that filled Sarah's heart. "I have something for you," Marcus said, finally reaching into his jacket pocket. "It's not much, but I needed to give you something that came from me, not from gratitude or obligation, but from love." He pulled out a small velvet box, and Sarah's heart stopped. "Marcus, it's not what you think," he said quickly. "I mean, someday, I hope it will be what you think, but right now, it's something else, something I had made." Sarah opened the box to find a delicate gold locket, simple and elegant and perfect. Inside was a tiny photograph, Marcus and Emma on one side, Sarah and Jake on the other. "When did you—" "I asked Maria to help me get copies of some photos while you were at work yesterday. The jeweler rushed the order because I told him it was important." Sarah felt tears spill down her cheeks as she touched the locket with trembling fingers. "It's beautiful. It's perfect. Turn it over." Engraved on the back in simple script were the words, "Everyone deserves a hero in their story. M." "Oh, Marcus," Sarah's voice broke on his name. "You saved me too, you know. Maybe not from a bullet, but from a life that was just about surviving instead of living. You and Jake, this house, this family we're building, you gave me back my future." Sarah couldn't speak around the emotion clogging her throat, so she simply turned and kissed him, pouring all her love and gratitude and hope into the connection between them. This kiss was different from the others, deeper and more desperate, carrying the weight of everything they'd been through and everything they hoped to build together. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Marcus rested his forehead against hers. "Sarah, I know, I feel it too. The children are asleep. Maria's in her own cottage. And I've been thinking about what you said earlier about taking things slow. And I think we've been through enough to know that life doesn't wait for perfect timing. Sometimes you have to take the leap and trust that love will catch you." Marcus studied her face in the starlight, seeing the certainty in her expression, the love and desire and complete trust that she was offering him. "Are you sure? I've never been more sure of anything in my life." He stood then, extending his hand to her with the same quiet gallantry he'd shown from the moment they met. "Then come with me, Sarah Dalton. Come with me and let me show you how much I love you." Sarah took his hand and let him lead her into the house through the quiet hallways where their children slept peacefully, secure in the knowledge that they were safe and loved and home. As they climbed the stairs together, Sarah felt the last of her carefully constructed walls crumble away, replaced by a trust so complete it took her breath away. This was what love was supposed to feel like, she realized. Not the desperate need to prove herself worthy, not the constant fear of losing what she'd gained, but this quiet certainty that whatever came next, they would face it together. In the soft darkness of her bedroom, Marcus kissed her with a tenderness that made her heart ache, his hands gentle and reverent, as they rediscovered each other beyond the barriers of gratitude and circumstance. There was no urgency, no desperate need to claim or possess, just the simple, profound joy of two people choosing each other completely. "I love you," he whispered against her skin. The words a prayer and a promise and a celebration all at once. "I love you too," Sarah replied, pulling him closer, marveling at the miracle that had brought them together. "I love you, and I love the life we're building, and I love the family we've become." Outside, the autumn wind rustled through the oak trees where Emma's fort would soon take shape. Inside, two broken families had become something whole and beautiful and unshakable, bound together not by blood or law or convenience, but by the simple revolutionary act of choosing love over fear, hope over cynicism, together over alone. The morning would bring new challenges, new questions about the future they were building together. But tonight, in the quiet sanctity of their shared commitment, Sarah and Marcus held each other and dreamed of all the tomorrows stretching out before them, bright with possibility and rich with love. 3 months later, Sarah woke to the sound of rain pattering against the windows and the familiar warmth of Marcus's arm around her waist. The October morning was gray and peaceful, the kind of day that invited lazy cuddles and second cups of coffee. But as she shifted closer to him, she felt the subtle tension in his body that told her he was already awake, probably had been for a while. "What's on your mind?" she murmured against his chest, her fingers tracing lazy patterns on his skin. "Today's the day," he said quietly. Sarah lifted her head to look at him, seeing the mixture of anticipation and nervousness in his brown eyes. Today was David's sentencing, hearing the final chapter in a legal saga that had dragged on for months through plea negotiations and psychiatric evaluations and countless meetings with attorneys. "Are you ready?" she asked. "As ready as I can be. What about Jake? He still wants to come." Sarah nodded, though the knot in her stomach tightened at the thought of her son facing his father in a courtroom setting. Jake had been adamant about attending the hearing, wanting to see justice served for the man who had saved his life. But Sarah knew it would be difficult for him regardless of how the proceedings unfolded. "He needs this closure," she said. "We all do." Marcus kissed the top of her head, his lips lingering in her hair. "Whatever happens today, we face it together." "Together," Sarah agreed, drawing strength from his steadfast presence. The past 3 months had transformed their tentative family arrangement into something solid and unshakable. Marcus had started work as head of security for Dalton Industries, bringing a level of professionalism and genuine care to the position that had impressed even Sarah's most skeptical board members. His military background and natural leadership abilities had made him instantly popular with the security staff, while his protective instincts and strategic thinking had already prevented 2 potential security breaches that could have cost the company millions. More importantly, he had settled into their family life with the ease of someone who had always belonged there. He coached Jake's Little League team, helped Emma with her increasingly complex art projects, and had somehow convinced Maria to teach him her secret recipe for mole sauce. The children had flourished under his steady presence, their grades improving their confidence, growing their laughter, filling the house with a joy that had been absent for far too long. "Mama," Emma's sleepy voice drifted from the doorway. "Can I come in?" Sarah smiled and lifted the covers, making room for the little girl who had become as much her daughter as Jake was her son. Emma scrambled into bed between them, her auburn curls wild from sleep. Mr. Buttons clutched tightly in her arms. "Bad dream?" Marcus asked gently, pulling both Emma and Sarah closer. "Not really bad, just confusing. I dreamed about my other mommy, the one who went away. She was trying to find us, but she kept getting lost." Sarah's heart clenched. Emma rarely mentioned Jessica anymore, but the approaching court date had stirred up complicated emotions for all of them. In the weeks following David's arrest, Sarah had hired a private investigator to locate Jessica Hayes, wanting to ensure that Emma maintained some connection to her biological mother. They'd found Jessica living in Portland, working as a waitress, and apparently unaware of what had happened to her daughter and ex-husband. The subsequent phone call had been one of the most difficult conversations of Sarah's life. Jessica had listened in shocked silence as Sarah explained the shooting Marcus's recovery and Emma's current living situation. When Sarah had offered to arrange visits or even have Emma come for extended stays, Jessica had been quiet for a long time. "She's better off with you," Jessica had finally said, her voice thick with tears. "I can see that just from the way you talk about her. I made my choice when I left. I don't get to come back and disrupt her happiness now." "But Jessica, she's your daughter." "No, she's your daughter now. I can see that even from 3,000 miles away. Just tell her I love her, okay? Tell her I think about her every day, but I want her to be happy more than I want her with me." The conversation had left Sarah emotionally drained, but also profoundly grateful for Jessica's selfless decision. Emma knew about the phone call, knew that her biological mother loved her, but understood that their current arrangement was best for everyone. It was a mature understanding for a 7-year-old, but Emma had always been wise beyond her years. "Want to talk about the dream?" Sarah asked gently. Emma shook her head and snuggled deeper between her parents. "I just want to stay here with you and Dad." Is that okay?" "More than okay," Marcus said, his voice rough with emotion. "This is exactly where you belong." Jake appeared in the doorway a few minutes later, already dressed but looking unusually subdued. "Is it time to get ready?" Sarah glanced at the clock and felt a flutter of nerves. "In about an hour. How are you feeling, sweetheart?" Jake climbed onto the foot of the bed, his expression thoughtful. "I keep thinking about what you said about how hurt people sometimes do hurtful things. I know he's my biological father, and I know I'm supposed to feel sad about what's happening to him, but mostly I just feel angry." "That's normal," Marcus said quietly. "It's okay to be angry, Jake. What he did was wrong, and anger is a healthy response to being hurt or threatened." "But you're not angry," Jake observed. "You're the one he shot, and you don't seem angry at all." Marcus considered this carefully. "I was angry at first, furious actually. But anger takes a lot of energy, and I decided I'd rather spend that energy loving your mom and you and Emma than hating him." "Is that why you want to speak at the sentencing, to show him you're not angry?" "Partly, but mostly I want to speak because I want him to understand the consequences of his choices. Not just the legal consequences, but the human ones. I want him to know that his actions affected real people with real lives and real feelings." Sarah felt a surge of pride at Marcus's thoughtful response. This was why she loved him, not just for his courage in that parking garage, but for moments like this when he helped her son process complicated emotions with wisdom and compassion. The courthouse was imposing and gray, its classical architecture designed to inspire respect for the law and the gravity of justice. Sarah held Jake's hand as they climbed the steps, while Marcus carried Emma, who had insisted on coming, despite Sarah's reservations about exposing her to the formal proceedings. "I want to see the man who hurt Dad," Emma had said with 7-year-old directness. "I want to tell him he's not allowed to hurt our family anymore." In the end, they'd decided that Emma could attend, but would leave with Maria before the sentencing phase if the proceedings became too intense or emotional. The courtroom was smaller than Sarah had expected, filled with a mixture of court officials, reporters, and spectators drawn by the unusual nature of the case. David sat at the defendant's table, with his attorney looking smaller and more fragile than Sarah remembered. 3 months in jail awaiting trial had taken their toll. His face was gaunt, his hair streaked with premature gray, his expensive suit hanging loose on his diminished frame. When he turned and saw them entering the courtroom, his expression crumbled with a mixture of shame and desperate longing. His eyes fixed on Jake with an intensity that made Sarah instinctively move closer to her son. "He looks sad," Emma whispered to Marcus. "He is sad, sweetheart. Very sad." "Good," Emma said with matter-of-fact satisfaction. "He should be sad for hurting people." The proceedings began with the prosecutor's sentencing recommendation, a methodical recitation of David's crimes and their impact on the victims. Sarah found herself reliving that day in the parking garage, the terror in Jake's eyes, the weight of the gun, Marcus's calm voice trying to defuse an impossible situation. The defendant's actions that day showed a callous disregard for human life, the prosecutor continued. He traumatized his own son, threatened to kill his ex-wife, and shot an innocent man who was simply trying to help. The state recommends a sentence of 8 to 12 years in prison, with mandatory psychological counseling and a permanent restraining order protecting the victims. David's attorney argued for leniency, citing his client's previously clean record, his struggle with depression following his business failures, and his genuine remorse for his actions. It was a competent defense, but Sarah could see in the judge's expression that it wasn't particularly compelling. Then came the victim impact statements, starting with Sarah's own carefully prepared remarks. She stood at the podium looking directly at David as she spoke about the fear and trauma his actions had caused, not just for her, but for both children. "My son has nightmares," she said, her voice steady despite the emotion in her throat. "He checks locks obsessively and flinches when he hears loud noises. Your actions didn't just affect me. They affected an innocent child who loved you and trusted you to protect him, not threaten him." David's face contorted with pain as she spoke, and Sarah saw tears streaming down his cheeks. Whatever anger or resentment had driven him to that parking garage, it seemed to have been replaced by genuine anguish over what he'd done to his son. When Sarah finished, Marcus rose to deliver his statement. The courtroom fell completely silent as he walked to the podium, his bearing straight and dignified despite the visible reminder of his still healing injuries. "Your Honor," he began, "3 months ago, David Morrison made a choice that changed all of our lives. He chose violence over communication, desperation over hope, revenge over healing. That choice resulted in physical trauma for me, emotional trauma for 2 children, and a completely altered future for everyone involved." Marcus paused, looking directly at David with an expression that held no hatred, only profound sadness. "But I want Mr. Morrison to know that his choice had one consequence he probably didn't anticipate. It brought my daughter and me into a family that loves us completely and unconditionally. It gave Jake a father figure who will never threaten him, never use his size or anger to intimidate him, never make him feel unsafe in his own home. It gave Emma a mother who sees her potential and nurtures her dreams, who makes her feel valued and cherished every single day." Sarah felt tears streaming down her face as Marcus continued. "I'm not grateful for being shot. I'm not thankful for the pain or the fear or the trauma. But I am profoundly grateful for the life that grew out of that terrible moment. Mr. Morrison, your actions were intended to destroy, but instead, they created something beautiful. I hope someday, when you've served your time and done the work to heal yourself, you can find some peace in knowing that your son is safe and happy and loved beyond measure." The courtroom was completely silent when Marcus finished, the only sound the soft scratch of the court reporter's fingers on her machine. Even the judge seemed moved by his words, her expression softening as Marcus returned to his seat. David's attorney waived his client's right to make a statement, probably recognizing that anything David said would pale in comparison to Marcus's gracious and powerful words. The judge called a brief recess to consider the sentencing, and Sarah felt the tension in her shoulders begin to ease. In the hallway outside the courtroom, Jake threw his arms around Marcus's waist. "That was perfect," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You didn't say anything mean about him even though he hurt you. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is show someone a better way to handle pain," Marcus replied, ruffling Jake's hair. Emma, who had listened to the entire proceeding with the serious attention of someone much older, tugged on Sarah's skirt. "Mama is the sad man going to jail now." "Yes, sweetheart, for a long time." "Good, but I still feel sorry for him." Sarah knelt down to Emma's level, marveling at this child's capacity for both justice and compassion. "Why do you feel sorry for him?" "Because he doesn't have a family like ours anymore. He made bad choices and now he's all alone." When court reconvened, Judge Patricia Morrison, no relation to David despite the shared surname, delivered her sentence with measured gravity. 10 years in state prison with the possibility of parole after 7 years contingent upon completing anger management and psychological counseling programs. A permanent restraining order protecting Sarah, Jake, and Marcus from any future contact. Restitution for medical expenses and therapy costs. David's shoulders shook as the sentence was read, his attorney's hand on his back the only comfort available to him. As the bailiff approached to lead him away, David turned one last time to look at his son. "Jake," he called out, his voice breaking. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." Jake stepped forward, his hand finding Marcus's for support. "I forgive you," he said quietly, his words carrying the weight of wisdom far beyond his 9 years. "But I don't want to see you anymore. Not until you're better, really better." David nodded through his tears, understanding perhaps for the first time the full magnitude of what he'd lost. As he was led away in handcuffs, Sarah felt a strange sense of closure settling over her. This chapter of their lives was finally ending, allowing them to move forward without the shadow of pending legal proceedings hanging over their happiness. Outside the courthouse, the October air was crisp and clean, carrying the promise of the coming winter and the holiday seasons they would share as a complete family. Jake walked between Sarah and Marcus, his hand in each of theirs, while Emma skipped ahead, her earlier solemnity replaced by the natural resilience of childhood. "So," Marcus said as they reached the car, "I have something to ask you all." Sarah looked at him curiously, noting the nervous energy in his expression. "What's that?" Marcus knelt down on the courthouse steps, his hand reaching into his jacket pocket, and Sarah's breath caught in her throat as she realized what was happening. "Sarah Dalton," he said, his voice strong, despite the tremor she could hear underneath. 3 months ago, you saved my life in ways I'm still discovering. You saved Emma's future, Jake's sense of security, and my faith in the goodness of people. You turned what should have been the worst day of our lives into the beginning of the best life I could have imagined. He pulled out a small velvet box, and Sarah felt her knees go weak. "I know this is unconventional proposing on courthouse steps after a sentencing hearing, but I wanted to ask you here in this place that represents justice and new beginnings with our children as witnesses." Sarah was dimly aware of passers-by stopping to watch, of courthouse reporters turning their cameras toward the unfolding scene, but all of her attention was focused on Marcus's face, on the love and hope and absolute certainty she saw there. "Will you marry me, Sarah? Will you let me spend the rest of my life proving that heroes don't just exist in fairy tales? They exist in everyday moments, in choosing love over fear, in building something beautiful out of something broken." Sarah looked at the ring he was offering, a stunning solitaire that caught the afternoon light like captured starfire, and then at Jake and Emma, who were practically vibrating with excitement. "Did you ask them first?" she managed to say through her tears. "Of course he did," Emma burst out. "We helped him pick the ring, and Jake said yes for you, but I told him you had to say it yourself." "I said she'd probably say yes," Jake corrected with 9-year-old precision. "But Marcus wanted to make sure you really wanted to marry all of us, not just him." Sarah looked at this man who understood instinctively that marrying her meant embracing their entire blended family, who had asked her children's permission before proposing, who had somehow managed to make a courthouse proposal feel like the most romantic gesture in the world. "Yes," she said, laughing through her tears. "Yes, of course, yes to all of it. Yes to marriage, and yes to family, and yes to spending the rest of our lives proving that love really can conquer everything." Marcus slipped the ring onto her finger with hands that shook slightly, then stood and kissed her with a passion that made her forget they were standing on the steps of a courthouse with half the city's legal community watching. "We're getting married," Emma shouted to anyone within hearing distance. "My daddy's marrying my mama, and we're going to be a real family." "We're already a real family," Jake said with the wisdom that constantly amazed Sarah. "Now we're just going to make it official." As they walked to their car, reporters called out questions about the proposal, the trial, their unusual love story. But Sarah barely heard them too, focused on the weight of the ring on her finger and the warmth of Marcus's arm around her waist, and the excited chatter of their children planning wedding details. 6 months later, on a perfect April morning, when the oak trees were budding with new life and the garden was bursting with spring flowers, Sarah Dalton became Sarah Hayes, in a ceremony that perfectly reflected their unconventional journey to love. The wedding was held in their backyard under an arch of white roses and baby's breath that Maria and Emma had spent weeks planning and perfecting. Jake walked Sarah down the aisle with the grave dignity of someone taking his responsibilities as man of the house seriously, while Emma served as both flower girl and ring bearer, her unicorn-themed dress a compromise between Sarah's preference for traditional elegance and Emma's insistence on something magical. Marcus waited at the altar in a navy suit that made his brown eyes look golden in the morning sunlight, his face radiant with joy and disbelief that this moment was actually happening. Beside him stood his best man, Richard Blackwood, who had gone from skeptical attorney to enthusiastic supporter of their relationship over the course of their engagement. The ceremony was presided over by Judge Patricia Morrison, who had become an unexpected friend during the months following David's sentencing. Her words were simple but profound, speaking of love that grows from crisis, strength that comes from vulnerability, and the courage required to build new families from the broken pieces of old ones. "Sarah and Marcus," she said as they exchanged rings, "you've already proven that your love can withstand the ultimate test. You've faced danger together, overcome trauma together, and built a family together. Today is simply the legal recognition of what you've already created through your choices and your commitment to each other." When Marcus kissed his bride, Emma cheered so loudly that the entire wedding party dissolved into laughter. Jake rolled his eyes with preteen embarrassment, but couldn't hide his grin, and Maria dabbed at her tears with a handkerchief she'd been saving for this exact moment. The reception was an intimate affair with only their closest friends and colleagues in attendance. But the joy was infectious, spreading through the crowd like ripples on a pond. Sarah danced with Marcus to their song "At Last" by Etta James while their children spun around them in dizzy circles, their laughter mixing with the music and the warm spring air. Later, as the sun set over their garden and the last of the guests drifted away, the four of them sat on the back patio. Emma curled up asleep in Marcus's lap, and Jake leaning against Sarah's shoulder, all of them exhausted but gloriously happy. "So," Marcus said softly, his free hand finding Sarah's, "Mrs. Hayes, how does it feel?" "Perfect," Sarah replied, her voice thick with contentment. "Absolutely perfect." Jake stirred against her shoulder. "Are you guys going to have more kids?" Sarah and Marcus exchanged a look over the children's heads, a whole conversation happening in that single glance. They'd talked about the possibility during their engagement, both agreeing that their family felt complete as it was, but both open to whatever the future might bring. "Maybe someday," Sarah said carefully. "Would you like that?" "I think Emma would like a little sister," Jake said thoughtfully. "She keeps talking about teaching someone how to paint and build forts." "And what about you?" Jake considered this with his characteristic seriousness. "I think I'd like a little brother, someone I could teach about baseball and chess and all the stuff Marcus taught me." Sarah felt her heart swell with love for this boy who had grown so much over the past year, who had learned to trust again, to hope again, to believe in the possibility of happy endings. "We'll see what happens," Marcus said diplomatically. "But right now, I think we have the perfect family exactly as it is." As if to prove his point, Emma stirred in his arms and mumbled sleepily, "Are we home yet?" "We're home, Butterfly. We've been home all along." 2 years later, Sarah stood at the same kitchen window where she'd watched Emma and Jake play soccer on that first uncertain day, but now she was watching a very different scene. Marcus was in the backyard with Jake, now 11, and showing real promise as a pitcher, while Emma, almost 10, and every bit as artistic as she'd predicted, painted a portrait of their newest family member. Baby Michael Hayes slept peacefully in his bouncy seat, oblivious to the love and chaos surrounding him. His arrival 18 months after the wedding had surprised everyone, including Sarah and Marcus, who had thought their family was complete. But Michael had claimed his place in their hearts with the same certainty that had marked every other major change in their lives. Emma was particularly devoted to her baby brother, having appointed herself his official protector and entertainment committee. She painted him pictures, sang him songs, and insisted on helping with every aspect of his care. Jake, initially uncertain about sharing his parents' attention, had quickly discovered that being a big brother came with its own special privileges and responsibilities. "He's going to be an artist like Emma," Jake had announced after Michael showed a preference for staring at colorful objects. "Or maybe a baseball player like me, or both." "Can you be both? You can be anything you want," Marcus had replied. And Sarah had seen in his eyes the same wonder that filled her own heart every time she looked at their children, all of their children, biological, and chosen each one a miracle in their own way. Now, as she watched her family through the window, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. The shooting that had started it all seemed like a lifetime ago, though she still wore Marcus's locket every day, the photos inside updated to include their wedding picture and baby Michael's first smile. David had been released after serving 5 years of his sentence, his parole contingent upon continued therapy and absolutely no contact with his former family. Sarah had heard through Richard that he'd moved to another state, found work as a mechanic, and was slowly rebuilding his life. She felt no anger toward him anymore, only a distant hope that he'd found some measure of peace and healing. Jake occasionally asked about his biological father, but without the intense need for connection that had once worried Sarah. Marcus had filled that role so completely, with such love and dedication, that Jake rarely seemed to remember there had ever been anyone else in that position. "I love you to the moon and back," Sarah murmured to baby Michael as she lifted him from his seat, breathing in his sweet baby scent. "And around all the stars," Emma added from her easel, not looking up from her painting, but never missing an opportunity to join in their family rituals. "Always and forever," Jake called from the backyard, adding his own variation to their daily affirmation of love. "Through every storm and every rainbow." Marcus finished appearing in the doorway, with dirt on his clothes and joy in his eyes. As the sun set over their home, their real, permanent, unshakable home, Sarah Hayes held her youngest child and looked around at the family that had grown from one moment of courage in a parking garage. They were living proof that sometimes the worst days lead to the best lives, that heroes really do exist in the most ordinary of people, and that love, when it's brave enough to act, can transform anything. Emma held up her finished painting, a portrait of their family standing under a rainbow with the words, "Everyone deserves a hero in their story," written in her careful child's handwriting across the bottom. "It's perfect," Sarah said, her voice thick with emotion. "Just like us," Emma replied with the matter-of-fact confidence of a child who had never doubted her place in the world, who had never questioned whether she was loved enough, safe enough, wanted enough. And in that moment, surrounded by the laughter and love and beautiful chaos of their chosen family, Sarah knew that Emma was absolutely right. They were perfect, not because they were flawless, but because they were perfectly themselves, perfectly committed to each other, perfectly willing to keep choosing love over fear, hope over cynicism, together, over alone every single day for the rest of their lives. The fairy tale was real, Sarah realized, not because it was effortless or magical or free from challenges, but because they had made it real through their choices, their commitment, and their unshakable belief that everyone deserves a hero in their story. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, you get to be someone else's hero while they're being yours.